Welcome to this episode of the Security Podcast. I'm your host, Linda van Tilburg, joined by my co-host.
Sean Raymond.
The Israeli-Hamas war has escalated onto the global stage, intensifying political and cultural polarization far beyond the immediate conflict zone. These divisions are evident in demonstrations on the streets of Britain and are felt as far away as Cape Town. To provide a military perspective on the war in the Middle East, we are joined by General Charlie Herbert, who served for 33 years in the British Army and completed 3 tours of duty in Afghanistan between 2007 and 2018. Welcome to the Security Podcast, General Herbert.
Thank you very much indeed for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be included. Thank you.
Hi, Charlie. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Sean. Very good afternoon. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you.
Good. Thank you.
So perhaps we can begin, Charlie, by giving us your sort of military overview of the situation in Israel at the moment.
Gosh, it's cramming, well, I suppose at a very minimum, that's cramming, 13, 14 months of conflicts into a very short period. In reality, it's probably cramming 100 years of conflict into a very short period, I suppose, if one was being more realistic. Can I start with a sort of caveat, please, Sean and Linda, and make the point that I'm definitely not an expert on Israel, Gaza, and the military and the Middle East. I sort of considered myself an interested observer, sort of a part-time military analyst who uses his experience in the UK military, 34 years in the army and then 3 years working for the Foreign Office. I just simply use that as the baseline for me to look at what is going on in Israel and Gaza and form a judgment on whether I think it's wise strategically, what I think Israel is doing, whether I think their tactical actions are sensible and logical. So it's very much, I'm not an expert, and I always sort of caveat any talks like this by stressing that. I mean, where are we, Sean? It's hard to believe it's been going on for 13 months. I mean, Israel don't fight long wars. For the last, 70 odd years, Israel has made a doctrine of fighting short wars, 2 to 3 months. And I predicted in late October that this war would be over in 3 months. I thought the US appetite would run out after 3 months. And I thought, they'd hit a stalemate and it would all be over. And I was proved wrong, and I think most people were proved wrong in that regards. So where are we after 13 months? Well, I mean, I suppose at its worst, where are we? Well, Israel in 13 months has managed to lose any sympathy, I think, from the West and certainly from the global South. Prime Minister of Israel had arrest warrant served on him by the ICC. Israel as a country has been charged with genocide. It's not a particularly good place to be as a nation or as a political leader. Militarily, Israel has undoubtedly inflicted very significant damage on Hamas, which they sought to do. And they have certainly attrited Hamas, set back Hamas's ability to conduct another attack like 7th of October very significantly. But I don't think they have eliminated Hamas, which is what they set out to do 13 months. And of course, they've killed tens of thousands of innocent men, women and children whilst performing that military action. What else has happened? Of course, they've dragged Lebanon into the war, or Hezbollah has inevitably got involved in the war from the outset in support of Hamas. Israel, therefore, is now fighting a war on 2 fronts, which is never a good thing to do. And as you will well know, Sean, in a way, that's what America and Britain were doing with both Iraq and Afghanistan in late 2006, 2007. And it goes against all the principles of economy of force and concentration of effort. So it's highly unwise to be doing that. Arguably, they opened up a third front against Iran. I say they opened it up. They are fighting a third front against Iran. But where are we politically? I don't think we're any closer to solving the root causes of this problem. I don't see any progress being made on the political track to bring about a better peace, to prevent this type of conflict from re-emerging in 5 years or 10 years' time. So I describe it slightly vulgarly as the futility of force. I think Israel has fallen into exactly the same trap that America did after 9/11, America and Britain and many of their allies, of lashing out in anger without thinking strategically and thinking that a military solution is going to bring about a political solution. But I see no evidence that we're any closer to that. I just find it utterly depressing to be quite honest.
There's a form of stalemate there seems to be, which has descended upon Gaza from a military perspective. It was always going to be a big ask, wasn't it, to try and say, we want to eliminate Hamas, because it's very difficult to see how one might be able to achieve that. Who are Hamas? How many members do they have? How do you go about killing them or quantifying um, that situation when you say you've actually achieved victory? That's what strikes me in this sort of political military stalemate now, which is, as you say, very depressing.
Yeah, and force has a limit all of its own, and we'll kind of understand that. And people slightly crudely said you can't defeat an ideology with military force, and I'm not necessarily sure I buy into that kind of argument, but I understand the sort of premise behind that one. Yeah, you're right. There's a stalemate. I mean, don't get me wrong. They have severely degraded Hamas as a fighting force, but at great cost. As far as I can see, the Israelis are, as you say, there is a stalemate. They are still losing, I think, 2 or 3 or 4 soldiers a week in North Gaza at the moment. So it is definitely not a benign environment. They are occupying very small parts of Gaza, the Gaza Strip, the 2 corridors from which they conduct raids against the remnants of Hamas. Hamas, I don't believe, are in any way defeated. I was listening to a radio show this morning in an interview when somebody was asking, who is providing the basic services in Gaza in the absence of Hamas? And the answer was, it's Hamas. Hamas have not gone away, and the services are still being provided, whether that's health or education or sewage, or I mean whatever those basic services are, they're still being provided by Hamas. So the military component of Hamas has been defeated, but Hamas as a political entity, as a civic society, and whatever one wants to call it, is probably stronger than it ever was, I suspect, inside Hamas. And I think what Israel have almost certainly done is create another generation of youngsters who will, whether it's Hamas or whatever follows Hamas, will be increasingly radicalized. There's no doubt about that in my mind.
Yeah, that's something that I think with your military experience in the counterinsurgency spectrum, you've probably seen before that when you carry out attacks like Israel has done in Gaza, at some point it's going to come back and haunt you, as it did with the British Army in Northern Ireland, as it did in Afghanistan, as it did in Iraq. It almost seems to be a fact of war.
Absolutely. I mean, and you'll remember, I think you did many embeds in southern Afghanistan, Sean. Yeah, I remember in sort of 2006, 2007, so how many Taliban do we need to kill to change the calculus of this conflict and, put us on the road to success? And we talked about numbers, and after you kill 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 over a period of years, and then you realize that you're not anywhere closer to winning the campaign, you realize that the numbers game is utterly irrelevant. And I think this is what we'll find in Gaza. I simply don't believe that the IDF and that Israel can kill their way to victory. I don't believe that they're going to kill their way to a better peace. I don't believe they're going to kill their way to a political solution. And what really saddens me about all of this is on the 7th of October, don't get me wrong, I was as mortified, as horrified, as disgusted and as sickened as anybody else. And I do genuinely believe that the majority of the decent world wept with Israel that day. Even if we said, history didn't start that day and, there's history to this. But we all did. But I find it staggering that Israel has sort of thrown all of that away, just completely thrown away that sympathy, fighting a war of this nature. But I thought at the time, I thought there was an opportunity. They can go one of 2 ways here. Netanyahu he could do a 9/11, a post 9/11, seek vengeance, lash out, and open a Pandora's box of problem and just exacerbate the problem to ensure that this confrontation runs for another 20 years. Or this could be a really introspective moment for Israel, where they could kind of have a proper national discourse about the Palestinian issue. But some good would come out of this. And I'm not naive. Of course, military action had to take place against Hamas in the aftermath of 7th of October. But what also had to happen is some form of parallel political track. And that is the bit that just appears to be missing. It just is as if Israel, almost to me, as if Israel have completely failed to look at our strategic failure in Afghanistan and to a certain extent in Iraq, just fails to learn the lessons from that and are therefore doomed to repeat the same mistakes that we made.
The position of the West seems to be that the only solution to Israel is a two-state solution, but Netanyahu seems to be totally against that and believes, from what I understand, in the one-state solution. What is the political solution to that crisis?
If I knew the answer to that, Sean, I'd line myself up for a Nobel Peace Prize in the next year or two. And I don't think anybody knows the answer to it. You know, in my heart, I think the solution is a two-state solution. But I think we are as far away from there as we've ever been. I personally can't see how one-state solution can work whilst retaining Israel, you know, in the form that Israel wishes it to be. But I think there needs to be a sort of a fundamental reset. One almost, Sean, needs to take a step back whenever this conflict sort of draws to whatever it's. I mean, it may just be an enduring conflict, but whenever kind of this particular phase of the fighting is over, and there needs to be another round of genuine dialogue and talks to bring about some form of solution. I don't know what that looks like, but it's got to bring all of the parties. It's got to include the United States. It's got to include Saudi Arabia. I'm afraid it's probably got to include Iran. It's got to include many of the regional actors. You know, they've got to realize that until they sit down and come up with whatever it is, Oslo free, son of Oslo, you know, until there's a genuine determination on all parts to find some form of solution, that this conflict will kind of continue to go on and on. And to a certain extent, and I feel slightly uncharitable when I say this, to a certain extent, I'm not altogether sure that the likes of Netanyahu wants a solution. I think he thrives on the idea of perpetual conflict. Not just him as a political entity, but I think to a certain extent, many Israeli politicians. And I think whilst they have this blind support of the United States, there's almost no incentive for Israel to find a solution. If that was threatened by President-elect Trump, unlikely as it seems, but if that level of support was threatened, then I think it would force the parties to the table to have a dialogue. It's not going to be quick. There's going to be no immediate solution out of this. And again, Sean, I know you served in Northern Ireland, and I hate using Northern Ireland as an analogy here, but there are certain, like, I think there are certain bits of the Northern Ireland troubles that are worth considering. It took 30 years to find a political solution. It was a political solution that probably could have been found after 5 years if the will was there. But the will wasn't there in the first 5 years. So it took 30 years to bring about the Good Friday Agreement. It was brought about not by military force or by policing action or good intelligence. They played a part of it. It was brought about by a combination of all of the instruments of national power. It was economical. It was development. It was education. It was social. It was everything being poured into that particular problem to bring about a solution within 30 years. And we've got there, and it's an imperfect solution in Northern Ireland. But I think this is the sort of timescale that we need to be looking at. I mean, you could say, yeah, but that's my time. It's been going on for 70 years. Why haven't they found a solution? And in a way, I just hope this period, the most horrendous attack on the 7th of October, and the most ghastly conflict, unlawful conflict that has followed, one just hopes that this is the catalyst that forces people to the table to find a solution. But I don't know what that looks like, Sean, and much wiser people than me, with far greater expertise of this region, you know, I'm not sure any of them know it at the moment.
I want to know, you mentioned the difference that Trump might make, or that when he comes in, we don't know what it's going to do. Is he not going to add fuel to the fire?
Yeah, I mean, I suspect he will. In my heart, I feel that he probably will do. And what we've seen during his last period in president would only suggest that he's going to do that. But I think he's so unpredictable. I was listening to something about Ukraine today, and I think, you know, the Ukrainians on the face of it absolutely dreading the arrival of Trump. But at the same token, you know, they're conscious that actually Trump is Trump, and things could reverse very significantly. And if Trump doesn't get what he wants out of Russia, then the chances are that Trump will therefore support Ukraine even more than he has done, than America has done. And I think, you know, a similar thing could happen. It's unlikely, I think, with Israel, but he's so unpredictable. We'll sort of see what happens. I mean, I think the problem here is that the US lobby, the pro-Israel, pro-Zionist lobby, in the United States is so strong, so powerful, and in my view, so preventing progress on this issue at the moment. But it will take a very strong president to change that calculus. Possibly that is Trump, as unlikely as that appears, Linda.
I think also just going back to your other point about Israel not wanting to continue with the war, that's very much the case with Hamas as well, I think. There doesn't seem to be any appetite whatsoever for any peace deal. They're still firing thousands of rockets. Well, I think since October the 7th, when the attacks took place, over 10,000 rockets have been fired into Israel. Israel says it's been attacked by 26,000 rockets from from Iran, from Hezbollah, from the Houthis. I mean, those are, if that figure is remotely correct, that's a huge sense of being under siege by your neighbors. And, playing devil's advocate, Israel would say, why should we engage in peace talks with these countries when they want to destroy us? Hamas is a sort of a nihilistic organization that wants to suck Israel in to ultimately see if it can destroy Israel. In many ways, in the same way that Al-Qaeda wanted the Americans to invade Afghanistan to try and sort of bring around the end of the regional, the regional presence of America in the Middle East.
I agree with everything you said there, Sean. I mean, the counter argument that I would say to Netanyahu there is, whatever you do, don't react in a way in which Hamas are hoping that you react. Don't play the way in which they're hoping you reacted on the 7th of October. I as much as, I mean, don't get me wrong, I haven't got a good word to say about Hamas. I mean, please don't misunderstand that. I have not got a good word to say about Hamas. If I want to look at it sort of objectively, I'm very critical of Israel's strategy in this war. Hamas don't appear to have a strategy, and one would say that their strategy is, as you said, nihilistic and self-defeating, and almost going to bring about their utter self-destruction. They've arguably achieved an awful lot of what they wanted to do, which was to set back Israel-Saudi sort of normalization. Done a damn good job at that. And I think they probably have brought the Palestine issue to a global audience in a way that nobody's done probably since sort of Yasser Arafat in the 70s. So they've achieved a remarkable amount in a certain way by doing what they did on the 7th of October and forcing a very heavy-handed Israeli reaction. But it's hard to understand why they continue in the way in which they've done. There have been various stages where I thought Hamas would agree to a ceasefire and would work to a ceasefire if Netanyahu was also willing to. There have been various stages where I was absolutely convinced that they would release hostages as a negotiating tool. But as you say, they appear to be almost sort of entirely nihilistic. So no, don't get me wrong. There is a degree of not necessarily sympathy for Israel, but certainly empathy for Israel and Netanyahu and his reaction to this one. But I think sort of strategically, I think it's folly what they're doing. And I think the very fact that he's created the circumstances whereby arrest warrants are now out on him from the ICC, and the ICJ case is still running. I mean, how on earth has Netanyahu managed to do that in 13 months? I mean, that is just extraordinary to me, given where people were on the 7th of October.
So what about the hostages? Is there any chance that they ever going to be released or that he can get them out?
I mean, I think I always said that military action, a clumsy war-fighting operation of 100,000 and, armoured brigades advancing north to south through Gaza was probably the least likely way of getting them back. And I think that's been, to a certain extent, proven true. One needed a degree of military pressure to apply to get them back. I think the only way to get the hostages back in this particular case was through negotiation. And I still believe that it's through negotiation. And I'm just kind of not sure that negotiation has been open and transparent and there's been a will to take it to where it needed to go. And we mustn't lose sight, Linda, of the fact that while Hamas are holding Israeli hostages, so Israel are holding Palestinian hostages under the guise of detainees in their thousands in administrative detention without charge. But at some point there needs to be an exchange of detainees and hostages. But it takes both parties to want that. And I fear what we've had to date is there may have been times where one party wanted it more than the other. There hasn't yet been a period where both parties have wanted it equally at the same time. But of course, I'm acutely conscious. But we read about stuff in the media and talking to colleagues, but there's so much going on behind closed doors which we're not privy to. So many back channel conversations and talks and stuff that we'll never be privy to. But will the hostages be released? God, I hope so. God, I hope so, Linda. I really do. On both sides. Yeah, I really do. And it's a bit like, the early release scheme asked of a Good Friday Agreement or as part of a Good Friday Agreement. And Linda, from South Africa, you know, these confidence building measures have to take place. They may be deeply uncomfortable to people on both sides, but they have to take place if there's ever going to be any progress and any move towards the cessation of this conflict, and then more importantly, a long-term political solution to it.
I think one of the things which the West will have to look to is what happens to Gaza, how you reconstruct Gaza. Who's going to do it? How is it going to be done? Is there going to be a peacekeeping force? And if there is, where does that peacekeeping force come from? That in itself is going to be such a monumental task, a global monumental task, I would say.
Yeah, and I'm very mindful that 8 or 9 months ago, all the talk was about the day after, and exactly this issue, Sean. How would Gaza be governed the day after the fighting? The guns went silent. Nobody's talking about that anymore. It appears to have completely disappeared, apart from a couple of media stories about private security companies, going in and, they call them gated communities, which is just bizarre, as if they're going to sort of, police and secure condos. I, I'm sort of skeptical that there's going to be an end to this conflict, that there's going to be a day after. I don't think that's the Israeli intent. I think the Israeli intent with regard to Gaza is to maintain this as a low-level conflict in perpetuity now. That's kind of where I feel that they are. A bit like the West Bank, but on a more violent perspective and on a more violent scale. I don't think there is a day after. I think the violence will reduce. I think Israel, in my view, will seek to retain a permanent presence inside the Gaza Strip, in the two corridors, but the one that separates Gaza City from the south, and the corridor in the south that separates effectively Gaza from the Egyptian border, the Philadelphia corridor, and from which Israel can conduct counter-terrorist strikes, armored raids against residual counter-terrorist threats as they see fit. So that's kind of how I think. If you would ask me what is the Israeli operational design at the moment for the next 5 years, that's what I think it is. I don't see any. Personally, I don't see how. I'm not sure what the alternative is, Sean. Palestinian Authority are not going to be accepted into Gaza, to govern it. So I think it's almost going to be left kind of almost governless. I don't see the idea of this sort of pan-Arab, Middle Eastern, Gulf state force, peacekeeping force deploying. I don't see any Western forces, kind of Western powers, European, American, putting troops on the ground inside there. So I don't know. I see this being, it's an occupation. It's not back to the days pre-2004, 2005 occupation, but effectively it is almost a West Bank style occupation by Israeli security forces, but I'm not quite sure who governs it. I think out of the ashes of Hamas, something will generate that may even be more radical than Hamas. We don't know. But I don't think there are any easiest answers to this, Sean. But what I find really depressing is that nobody is asking these questions. And I'm glad you've asked that question. What does happen on the day after? When and if there is a day after?
Do you think Israel has planned for a day after?
I don't think Israel planned much more than a week ahead when it comes to this campaign. I think they've had a very incremental strategy, really based on a series of sort of tactical activities, almost kind of winging it on a monthly basis, I think, to see what would happen. No, I don't think they've got I genuinely know. I don't think they have a plan. I think almost every month, iteratively, they will be examining this question. What do we do? What do we have to do? Where are we politically? Where is US support? Where is all of this? No, I don't. I think they would have announced it. I think they would have. Do you remember 6 months ago they were under enormous pressure to talk about what the day after plan was, but they were just simply incapable of doing that. And I think it's because they don't have a plan. And yeah, conditions. I think they'll eventually start talking about conditions-based withdrawal. When the conditions allow, we will withdraw. We'll draw down our things. We'll probably end only up with a couple of brigades inside Gaza in the two corridors. But that's probably all they need. That in itself will enable them to control the population movement in Gaza. It will allow them to prevent any kind of economic development and all the rest of it, and it will provide them a base from which they, as I say, conduct counter-terrorist operations. So the next 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, for as long as they're able to, or as long as they feel that they need to, until again. And they'll be doing this, but we'll be talking about this in 10 or 15 or 20 years, and our children will be talking about this unless something fundamentally changes politically. And that's the bit that's got to happen. But I think we're still a very, very long way away from that, sadly. And that's the tragedy, the absolute tragedy of this campaign. 40,000 Palestinians killed or whatever it is, 1,200, 1,300, 1,400 Israelis killed on the 7th of October and since. And the real danger is that all of this, it's for nothing. It's for nothing. I mean, Sean, it's a bit like the Afghan campaign. It's heartbreaking. But you kind of look back on it and you just think it was all for nothing.
Yeah.
And it will break my heart if the same thing happens in Israel and Gaza, because there was an opportunity here after the horror, after the barbarity, after the atrocity of the 7th of October, for a period of introspection and to change the calculus and to make the future different, to find a better peace. But I don't think, as you say, Sean, neither side wants that yet.
Just to finish off, I'd really like your view on how it's become such a polarized debate in the UK now. Probably elsewhere as well, but certainly from the UK. If you criticize in Israel anyway, you're a Hamas supporter, and if you say anything about Palestinians being treated badly, then you're regarded as being anti-Semitic or anti-Zionist. It's just no sort of middle ground, it seems. Yet I find myself in a position where I can often be critical of Israel, but I'm certainly not anti-Semitic or anti-Zionist. I spent time as a student on a kibbutz. One of the kibbutz near the Gaza Strip was actually attacked. I've got lots of Jewish friends, but that's the state of play now. I am sure that you've had a lot of abuse for your views on Twitter and elsewhere.
It's kind of heartbreaking, isn't it, that one can't have balanced discourse on this. As you say, it is entirely polarizing. It just fires people up. People who I consider long-term friends, military colleagues, boom, crash, physical clashes on this particular topic. It's more than the Israeli-Palestine issue, isn't it? It's right v left playing out, I think, on a grand global domain at the moment. There's sort of everything whipped into this. In my view, it's pretty simple. I mean, you can be critical of Israel, but that doesn't make you it certainly doesn't make you anti-Semitic. It's absolutely insane. It's ridiculous. It's stupid, that kind of accusation. That criticizing the political state of Israel is anti-Semitic. That's nonsense. And at the same time, I think one can be highly critical of the Israeli Defense Force and the campaign, but that doesn't make one a Hamas supporter. And I really wish that kind of people could see that. Yeah, this is much bigger than the United Kingdom, as you say, Sean. This is Europe. I think this is polarizing opinion in America in a way in which I don't think it used to in the past. I think there's an increasingly pro-Palestine movement in America, which there wasn't necessarily in the past. Yeah, it's really sad. I think the bit that also worries me, and I think this is why I was quite pleased about the announcement, relieved, not pleased, by the ICC decision yesterday. To me, it almost seems, but whether or not you subscribe to this idea of a rules-based international order, or whether you think that's just a Western invention, but a lot of the sort of post-Second World War institutions and rules and the laws of war seemed really close over the last year to just being ripped up and forgotten, and turning us back into a sort of late 19th century sort of society, global society, and that's a really worrying place to be. And yeah, in a way, I was just quietly relieved that after all of that prevarication and all of the threats against them, that the International Criminal Court had the moral courage to issue those arrest warrants. Because to me, that to a lesser or greater degree proves that the international rules-based order and international humanitarian law does still apply. And I think that's really important. And I think we're all guilty of playing fast and loose with that. And I think America and the United Kingdom, in invading Iraq in 2003, we threatened some of that. But I just thought it was quietly encouraged yesterday with that ICC. Now, that's not to suggest, I'm not saying Netanyahu is guilty of those crimes which he is being accused, but I think it is absolutely right that he be charged with them, and Hamas leadership charged with those crimes. And I do hope that one day that there is a court case and they are either convicted or acquitted. But I think there ought to be a court case that examines this in absolute detail, and that should then set the gold standard for the future of conflict. Otherwise, I think we're in a really dark place in the future. I think we already are in a really dark place for the future of conflict, and it be increasingly fought with utter disregard for principles like distinction, for principles of proportionality, everything, Sean. But I think you and I grew up in the military holding really dear to our sort of values and standards.
Yeah, I agree.
Can I also say this polarization that you're talking about? I agree. I'm a journalist for a very long time, and as you said, I've reported in Africa. I've reported, all over the world, and I've never seen this polarization. It's on the streets of London. It is on the streets of Cape Town as well. It's polarized South Africa. I mean, its whole foreign policy reflects this division. So I think we talk about a 100-year period and a long period, but I think this has really polarized the world like almost never before, not in the time that we live in.
No, I mean, Linda, you're absolutely right. This is not about individuals. This is, to a certain extent, there's a polarization here between the global South and the traditional West. And I think this conflict is significantly undermining the West, Europe, and the United States in the eyes of an increasingly powerful, important, and vociferous global South. And South Africa's very courageous action with the ICJ, I think, is an example of that. Yeah, I mean, I look at this campaign I'm British, I look at it through the eyes of a Brit. My partner's Icelandic. She has a very, very different view on this particular campaign. But I think, I talk to friends in places where I've served, whether that's Somalia or Afghanistan. They just can't get their head around this. They cannot get their head around Western support for Israel, to be quite honest. They can't. It's hard to.
But it's also politicized because South Africa is accused of getting money from Iran for this court case. So it's really become exceptionally complicated.
Yeah. No, I mean, absolutely. I mean, but the sooner this conflict, the sooner there's some sort of solution to this, the better. It's not just the threat of a sort of regional conflagration. I think you absolutely say it's the impact that it's having globally, the impact that it's having in people's confidence in the post-war institutions. I mean, the UN is probably under greater threat now than probably almost any other time since it was formed. Huge lack of confidence, I think, in many, many countries now in those institutions. But as I say, I think that confidence was restored slightly, in my view, by the decisions of the ICC, by the ICJ. But America's continued vetoing of resolutions, continued vetoing in the UN Security Council. Again, I think it threatens the future of it undermines the sanctimony and it undermines the credibility of the UN Security Council. And I think we continue to see that. It's extraordinary. I mean, I was quietly encouraged, but the UK didn't abstain or veto the resolution this week. I mean, I think that's the first time that we've seen it. And we are seeing slight changes, I think, in the UK. Yeah, I was absolutely disgusted when the UK jumped on the bandwagon and suspended funding of UNRWA in January. And we were part of many European nations and the United States, but suspended funding for sort of 7 months. And now I noticed the UK mission to the UN in New York is very, very vociferous in this, very, very critical of the Israeli government at the moment for their criminalization, banning of UNRWA, and all of that. So I think there is a sort of there's a gradual shift, but it's to a certain extent it's too little and it's too late. And as you say, it's I think Europe, the UK, the United States, very, very much discredited in the eyes of the global South. And we may have ignored that. We may not have cared about that 20 years ago, Linda, but I think the world is changing.
I think even the ICC announcement was polarizing, wasn't it? Because I think firstly, America is saying that it has said that equating Netanyahu and Gallant with a Hamas leader is just absurd. The Hungarian prime minister has come out and said that he will invite Netanyahu to come and visit Hungary, and he's signed up to the International Criminal Court. I'm not sure what the UK has said. They seem to be on the fence, although since Number 10 has indicated that it will support the arrests. But some people are saying that the announcement by the ICC was a deliberately provocative act. It just seems that no statement announced by anybody, anywhere, cannot be polarizing.
No, I mean, absolutely. And I think some of the incoming Trump team are saying, watch this space on the 20th of January, because the United States will take action against those ICC who made this decision. I mean, they're already threatening the ICC. Yeah, it's not just polarizing, it's just extraordinary, it's appalling. It's extraordinary. It undermines international humanitarian law. And I know we've seen quite a lot of that from the United States, but it just disappoints me that we're going back into that era again.
Well, thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed for having me. Thank you.
Yeah, Charlie, thanks. It's been great. Well, I thought that was absolutely fascinating podcast there with Charlie. He's obviously very passionate about the subject, about Israel, about the Gaza war, and has some very strong views, which obviously not a lot of people are going to agree with. But I think it also showed how polarized the debate is. We spoke a bit about it at the end, but it is a polarizing debate in this country, in the US, and across the world. What do you think?
I think it's hardened attitudes generally between groups. You easily get tagged for being either Islamophobic or for being anti Semitic, even though you're just criticizing what the IDF or what Israel might be doing. Yeah, it's incredibly polarizing. And it has had an effect not only in the Middle East, but everywhere.
Yeah, I totally agree. Anyway, that's the end of one podcast, and we'll look forward to the next one coming soon.